think with me about the rules that you encounter in life. In general, you might say rules exist simply to keep someone safe. They could be rules in society, rules in your work, maybe your friendship or parenting. We have rules everywhere. Okay, now ask yourself, have you ever allowed yourself to hide behind that rule? What do I mean by this? Well, think of it this way. Have you ever used a rule, whether it was a formal or an informal one, and have you hidden behind that rule for the sake of the rule rather than the person it was meant to protect? Well, when I think of rules and my stage in life in particular, I immediately think of parenting. I have 2 teenagers, and some days it feels like every day of the week could be bound by rules. You're allowed this much screen time. You're not allowed to use that type of language with your parents or with anyone. You need to do these chores around the house. You need to go to bed by this time on school nights. And if you have ever been a parent, maybe you can relate to some of these feelings around rules. But I admit, I can definitely think of times where I have enforced the rule simply for the sake of enforcing the rule, rather than for the sake of my kids. I've been principled about household chores. I have been stubborn about bedtime and screen time. I've been moralistic about music they listen to or slang they use, even though they hear that song on the radio or the slang on network television. I've prioritized the rule more than my kids. And there are undeniable feelings behind this. I hate to admit that there's no other way to say it. Sometimes there's something inside of me that simply likes to be right. Can you relate? Well, in this series, we're asking the question, what does it mean to be spiritual? And today I want to look at the idea that sometimes religious people love rules more than they love Jesus. There's a story in the Gospel of John about Jesus healing a blind man. Now, Jesus and his disciples are walking along, and the disciples say in chapter 9, verse 2, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Now, that might sound a little ridiculous to us, but it was more common in Jesus' day that someone's ailment or someone's disability was somehow brought upon them by some sort of sin. But Jesus, in the story, says, no, this isn't from any sin. And in fact, this blind man who has been a beggar, the person who all of us judged at one time or another, this man is going to be utilized by God to show us all something amazing. And in verses 6 and 7, Jesus spits into the mud. He puts that spit and the mud into the man's eyes, and he tells him to go to a pool. So again, in the Bible, we read, "So that man went home, he washed, and he came home seeing." It's a miracle. This man's neighbors, everyone around him is stunned. You can imagine the neighborhood chit-chat. They've never known him to be anything but blind, and suddenly he's telling them about this guy named Jesus who spit in the mud and healed his eyes. So the neighbors respond by taking him to the religious rulers of the day, the Pharisees. And we learn a detail that we didn't previously know. Jesus healed the blind man on the Sabbath. Jesus did something big on a day that was meant to be restful. These Pharisees knew their 10 commandments, and they knew that one of them clearly said, "Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy." So some of these Pharisees react to this. They say, "This Jesus man must not be from God. We don't know where he came from, and he did something on the Sabbath that he should clearly not have done. Jesus, he must be the sinner." The Pharisees, they even question this man's parents. They are skeptical that he was even blind to begin with. They go back and they go forth rather than listening to anything the formerly blind man has to say. They throw him out of the temple altogether. These people who are supposed to be great examples of spirituality, they reject this man. They're obsessed with the fact that a rule honoring the Sabbath has been broken. And ironically, they're unable to allow themselves to see that the blind man's livelihood has been completely restored, that his faith is now strong because they put the rule above the person. And there are a lot of stories like this in the Bible where someone thought they would never be spiritual enough. Something in society, it made them feel rejected. It made them feel like the rule makers were too busy feeling good about being right even to notice them. And I think there are plenty of places in our lives where we experience this too. Maybe we have been the ones sitting on the side of the road, just waiting for someone to see us, like Jesus saw that blind man, when our faith journeys aren't by the book like everyone else's seem to be. Or maybe we are the ones who are the religious law enforcers. I know I've been guilty of this plenty of times. In church, when we have someone who's brand new, someone who's never even been to church before, and then they start worshiping with us, but they have no idea what to expect. They're not sitting still like I expect them to. They're not dressed up in what I grew up with as Sunday best. Or their kids are running around the worship space. And I have to check myself because I quickly start to put on my religious ruler hat. I obsess about the rule rather than remembering the person. And the Pharisees could have addressed this blind man with more questions than answers. They were confused, after all, by Jesus' actions because it didn't line up with their spiritual practices. But what if they would have simply sat down with him and said, okay, set aside those rules for just a minute and tell me more about your story. Tell me about your experience with Jesus. They could have done this out of humility and open hearts rather than rejecting him altogether. So today I have a couple of questions for you to think about. When have you let rules get in the way of people? When have you or others somehow hidden behind religion? And what would it look like to get to know someone rather than to reject them for being different? Thanks for being here today. We'll see you next time.